This is Outnumbered. I'm ANDREA TANTAROS, and here today, host of Kennedy on Fox Business, Kennedy, editor of townhall.com, PAVLICH is back, commentator and national spokeswoman for the LIBRE Initiative, Rachel Campos-Duffy is also here, and today's hashtag, one lucky guy, retired four-star General Jack KEANE. He's also a former Army Vice Chief of Staff, chair of the Institute for the Study of War, and Fox News military analyst. And General, you are outnumbered. I believe we call this asymmetric warfare. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yeah, right. Good. We're honored to have your experience with us on the couch today, General.
Thank you so much. Delighted.
All right. Let's get to it. With just 4 days until the first in the South primary in South Carolina, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz ratcheting up their attacks on one another. Their one-time bromance long in the rearview mirror. Trump at a news conference in the Palmetto State yesterday, tearing into Cruz with perhaps his harshest words yet.
I've never seen anybody that lied as much as Ted Cruz. And he goes around saying he's a Christian. I don't know. I think he's an unstable person. I watch him, I see him, and I always say he's a good debater, but he can't talk. I've seen some that are much more cunning because you wouldn't catch him. I mean, this guy lies, but he got caught every time. He got caught with Carson. The good ones are the ones that can do it and not get caught.
Well, Trump also threatening to sue Cruz over his Canadian birth if he doesn't take his, quote, false ads and retract his lies. But Cruz hit back by questioning his rival's state of mind and saying that he's, quote, lost it. Listen.
I mean, he was just going on and on about how I'm the most horrible person in the world because I keep repeating the things he said. This is the most rattle I've ever seen, Donald, this press conference today, where he just kind of stood and vented. I think he avoided profanity, so that was good.
In the meantime, while he says he's not choosing sides, the man who won the South Carolina primary in 2012, former Speaker of the House, also outspoken, Newt Gingrich, and he's calling on Trump to cool it.
I wish Trump would drop all of the personal ad hominem things which he seems to enjoy so much. I think it weakens the country. I think it weakens him. I think it makes us look stupid. And I'm not defending Cruz or anybody else. I'm just saying I think the whole politics of this kind of personal stuff is almost deranged. That makes no sense to me.
All right, so it is quite the fight on the Republican side, General, and a number of these candidates on both the right and the left that have these epic battles right now, political battles, they've come to you to talk to you, probably seeking your endorsement. You will not endorse, you have not endorsed. When you look at what's happening in the Republican side, which competitors look strong, which competitors look weak? Give us your analysis of the current state of the Republican race.
Well, I can't get into the candidates because what I deal with is national security issues, but in terms of the challenges these candidates are facing and what they were seeking from me is largely the region of the world that is most troubled is the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, even scholars who spend all their time with this are scratching their heads about what are the solutions there. Mm-hmm. And certainly it's understandable. The major issue they recognize, and this is Democrats and Republicans, is that the world has changed so much, and it seems like we're facing considerably more problems now than we have in the past. What I frankly tell them is the United States has not faced problems we're dealing with today on this kind of scale since post-World War II and the rise of the Soviet Union. Global jihad is morphing throughout the world. We have three revisionist powers, Russia, China, and Iran, who are seeking regional domination, and every one of them has achieved a degree of that success. Mm-hmm. And we have cyber countries who have advanced technologies that have the capabilities to bring down our financial banking system, our transportation system, and our energy system in this country at network speed. And they are stealing money, intelligence property, and intelligence information from us at alarming rates. Those are major problems that we're facing.
So, General, when you hear them taking personal shots, does it bother you that they're not focused on these larger issues?
Well, yes, I want political candidates, but who am I? I'm one American citizen. I want them to focus on the issues, and the issues are so serious for the American people and the future of our security that just on national security alone, we should be spending more than half the time, at least, on just differentiating how would you deal with this specific issue. And I think the overall issue that I tell a candidate if they want to talk to me, I say one of the first things you should come to grips with, what is the role that you believe America today should play in the world? What is its leadership role? Because I fundamentally believe that looking at the American president we have right now, he has a different view of what America's leadership role is in the world than most of his predecessors who were Democrats and Republicans since World War II.
Yeah. Okay. To that point, Katie, and I agree with the General, at these debates, they'll get a question about what we do in Syria or a question about the Middle East, and it bothers me sometimes that I just hear, arm the Kurds and the Peshmerga, moving right along. Right. We don't really have a robust debate about national security, and we're certainly not having it in South Carolina.
Well, I think it's, you know, the first point is that when Donald Trump and Ted Cruz are exchanging these insults on whatever issue of the day they want to talk about, for Trump yesterday, it was Iowa, he's still in Iowa, they're not talking about very serious issues that are facing the country. There are very sobering, as you just laid out, General, situations that we have to deal with, and the next president is going to have to deal with. And I would argue that Donald Trump, his entire campaign has been based on insults and calling people liars because he can't talk about these things. Marco Rubio can talk about these things in depth. Ted Cruz can talk about these things in depth. Donald Trump has never held a press conference to say, let me lay out my national security plan and talk to you about how we can at least make the country feel a little safer if I were president. He can't do that because his entire campaign is based on a superficial insult continuing because he can't talk about it.
In fairness, though, Kennedy, when you look at the other candidates, Jeb Bush has hurled quite a few insults back at Donald Trump. I've heard the word loser. At the debate the other night, we heard the word mooning. We heard the word child molester. I mean, it reached a level of pettiness that I think we almost have not seen before. But John Nolte, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, he's on Breitbart, and he posted this morning, look, Donald Trump has the wherewithal to take this to the other side. The Republican establishment has not done that in the past. We had a candidate in John McCain and Mitt Romney who was scared to go after Obama. So he argued in favor of these really harsh attacks that you hear playing out. Is that a fair point?
Well, I think we have to be flexible. I don't think we can apply the rules of past elections and campaigns. I think we're really foolish to do that. And, you know, when you look at this, at some point, you know, conventional wisdom would say we have to drop the insults because people are going to get sick of it. Republicans are going to damage themselves so much. I don't think that's going to happen. We're only on South Carolina. This is only the third state to cast votes. It hasn't even gotten hot yet. I mean, you're talking about candidates going after each other with these personal attacks within hours of Supreme Court Justice Scalia's death, which I thought would shift the tenor of the debate dramatically, and that didn't happen, and that only adds another level of chaos to what General Keane was already saying.
Yeah, we haven't dug deep on the national security. I don't think any candidate has really dug deep with details. All right, George W. Bush hitting the campaign trail on behalf of his brother Jeb for the very first time in South Carolina. The former president didn't call out any of Jeb's opponents by name, but he did say this.
And I understand that Americans are angry and frustrated. But we do not need someone in the Oval Office who mirrors and inflames our anger and frustration. We need someone who can fix the problems that cause our anger and frustration, and that's Jeb Bush.
The brothers also sat down for an exclusive interview with Sean Hannity. They talked about foreign policy and defeating ISIS, and Bush 43 made this point.
The lessons of 9/11 are being forgotten by a lot of people, and that is the human condition elsewhere matters to our national security. If we let down our guard against this group of thugs, they will hurt us again. And the good news is Jeb won't let down his guard.
Okay, Rachel, there is a pretty big debate in the Republican Party today about how much the Bushes should be the highlight of Jeb's campaign and how much they shouldn't be. Is it a good idea for Jeb to bring in his family and sort of play revisionist history on Iraq?
I'm not sure it is, and I'll tell you for two reasons. One is I think that people are not so mad. I don't think they believe that what Trump has been saying, that he lied. I think they maybe think he's been misled, that George Bush was misled by his advisors. But I do think they're angry because they think George Bush got us Barack Obama. And so that reminder is bad. The other thing is, when you see George Bush on the stump, he's so likable, he's so charming. And then the contrast with Jeb, who's so dry and sometimes seems really insecure. Now, I do think, back to the point we were making before, I think Trump has taught these guys how to street fight. And ultimately, I think the Breitbart guy was right. I mean, you got to street fight if you're going to win. Trump made Jeb better. But seeing him next to his brother, we're reminded about why it's just not enough.
Because the left, Kennedy, they are street fighters. Yeah. That's how they fight. So finally we have a candidate who's willing to street fight. We'll see how well that plays out.
But they don't shiv each other. I mean, that's the interesting thing is, you know, when you watch Democrats debate one another, it really doesn't get that nasty, which is why I think no matter who is the nominee, it looks like it's going to be Trump at this point. When he brings it to Democrats in those general election debates, I think they're going to be surprised at how bloody it can actually get. Does that make the country better? That's what we have to ask ourselves. Will it give us a better president? Is it better for the process? Will it bring people jobs? Will it bring them comfort and the things they desperately need that have created this climate in the first place?
Katie, you're an editor at Town Hall, conservative publication, so you hear from your readers all the time. And there is a divide in the Republican Party where I think people can agree George Bush was a great guy, and you can't argue that.
Yeah.
And he did take the fight to the radical Islamic jihadists. It's what he did after the nation building, the democracy promotion. I know that fantasy bothers me.
Yeah.
But also, to Rachel's point, he wasn't a conservative in the last couple of years. The spending, the expiring tax cuts, the no child left behind without federal funding, never-ending wars. People are upset. And I think, I mean, personally, we want to turn the page from the Bushes.
Well, I think we need to keep in mind that Nancy Pelosi was in charge, and Barack Obama, or George W. Bush also had a majority Democrat Senate and House that he had to work with. So a lot of the spending that came through, he was actually honoring Congress and allowing that to go through because they were the ones who proposed it. So I don't think you can put the entire expansion of the government, although he could have vetoed more, on George W. Bush. He worked with Congress, which was held by liberal Democrats, the most liberal of them, Nancy Pelosi, I already mentioned. But going back to George W. Bush Jeb bringing George Bush onto the campaign trail, I would agree with Rachel completely. The problem for Jeb is that it makes Jeb look boring. I mean, you know, there's a reason why George W. Bush was the president, because he has this charisma. He went out there, and the contrast of just the way that they give a speech is just so obvious. And I think that doesn't help Jeb at all.
But it hasn't worked for Jeb. Anything before this hasn't worked. And you know, this, I think his mom was kind of a Hail Mary, but the
General, before we go, the Iraq War seems to be tearing the Republican Party apart. Any thoughts when you see the candidates and the debate the other night with Donald Trump bringing up 9/11, you see the candidates fighting over the Iraq War. Any thoughts going forward on what we need to do and what you would like to hear the candidates say?
Well, certainly, I think we should try to get over this political psychosis we have over Iraq in terms of whether we should have gone to war, yes or no, whether Obama's responsible for ISIS and how we ended the war, and just get on with the problems that we're really dealing with. The problems are so significant and so challenging. We got to put our minds on those problems, and we spend so much time bashing each other about past mistakes. Unless, yes, there's been past mistakes. There have been Republican mistakes and Democratic mistakes, and that's true throughout our history. Let's deal with the challenges we got in front of us.
All right. Last word goes to the General. So, how much do we really know about the threat from ISIS? A new report that top military analysts warned intel officials the Obama administration is skewing intel on ISIS for political reasons. A big story. More on that up next. Plus, new fallout after the sickening video of our U.S. sailors being forced to their knees in surrender to Iran during their capture by Iran's Navy. A top U.S. senator, finally, John McCain, demanding answers. We're going to tell you how he plans to get them.